the go live button. We're not quite live yet, I don't think. Direct into Facebook Live. We are live now. Okay, everybody, hold on. I've got to get myself back to Zoom. You know how this works. It takes me a minute. Hold on. Oh, okay. Get back over there. Here we are. Dude.
Hello.
You are looking really ridiculous.
Well, you know, kind of my default setting. So
I've known you for a long time, so I'm aware of this.
yeah. You and my long-suffering wife, as I like to refer to her. So.
Everybody, it's Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and I am here with the amazing Michael J. Spradlin. We have, as you may already have intuited, been friends for a long time. And he got a little miffed that I hadn't asked to interview him.
Yeah.
And it's basically because I don't even know where to start with you.
Well, just a minute. I'm still recovering. Okay, I'm over it now.
Okay. I counted, by the way, on your website that you have written 33 or had 33 books published. Is that an accurate number?
That is accurate. Yes.
That's more than me.
And more that haven't been published. So
that's
probably like 150 that haven't been published.
So we're going to talk about a bunch of things. We're going to talk about what Mike's doing, which is really interesting because he is targeting a lot of his books target reluctant readers, boys who are reluctant readers. But we're also going to target gift books for kids for the holidays because I believe that that is the best book ever, and I know a lot of you agree. But I want to say something first. In addition to have written 33 books for kids of all ages, here is the way Mike describes himself. He says, surrounded by books in his formative years, he grew up loving to read, imagining himself the hero of numerous epic battles and indulging in his favorite pastime, which was smuggling fireworks across the Ohio border so that he could blow up his collection of plastic green army men and matchbox cars.
That's insanely accurate.
And what kind of kid were you?
What kind of kid was I?
Yeah.
I was, I think, probably the two adjectives my mother would have used were inquisitive and determined. The fact about growing up surrounded by books is that's really true. My mother suffered from we didn't know it now, but we know now, a disease that caused her to have very poor vision.
Oh.
And in fact, when she was a child during the Depression, the state was going to take her away from my grandparents and put her in a school for the blind. And my grandparents actually hid her with relatives so that the state could not, come and take her away.
Oh.
So she was always reading because she was always afraid that she was going to lose her vision and she would never be able to read again. So that was one. I mean, we were by no means rich. My mom worked in an insurance office and my dad worked in a factory, but we always had books. That was one luxury that my mom sort of insisted on. And I grew up in this incredibly small town, about 1,500 people. But we had one of those work progress administration's Carnegie libraries on the town square. And the famous story about me and reading in my family, and I was too young to remember this, but it was told all the time by my mom, and it's still told by my sisters, was that when I was about 2.5, my sisters were babysitting me. They're much older than I am. And they were babysitting me on a Saturday, which was library day, and they were not getting with the program. I wanted to go to the library. They were doing hair, or, talking to boys on the phone, or, whatever teenage girls do. And so impatient, I set out for the library by myself with my library book at age 2.5, with, still in diapers. marching down the street and then up the street. And I got about a block and a half away when Mr. Young, who owned the IGA store in town, spotted me and figured out that I probably shouldn't be there with no one around, and took me back home. And my sisters at that time had discovered that I was gone and had mobilized the entire neighborhood into a search party. But I was just, that was it. I was, library time is library time, and I'm not to be trifled with. And
Do not mess with that.
no, you don't. And I mean, I'm still shocked to this day when I go back home and look at how far it actually was from my house at the time to for a 2.5-year-old. It's pretty darn impressive. So
Well, there you go.
but so that was the kind of kid that I was. Luckily I grew up. My mom had this just amazing sense of humor, and 90% of our conversations and communication with each other was joking and laughing and sarcasm and teasing each other. And
That's kind of the way you are now.
that's just my default setting, I guess. It's just, restore to factory settings, and that's me. I'd rather, I think life is a lot easier if you laugh your way through it. And there's very few situations that can't be handled with some laughter and
You were always a reader from a young age, but I want to talk about boys and books right now.
Right.
I don't know if it's a generalization, if it's really true that boys tend to be more reluctant readers than girls. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think it's a multi-layered question. And having worked in publishing for as long as I have, there has been there's several points to that issue, and I will try not to go on too long, but it is something that I'm very passionate about. So you'll have to forgive me if I do. But for a long time, there has been this perception in the publishing industry that boys don't read. So consequently, since publishing is a business, what do? You go after the biggest part of the market that does the reading. My contention has always been that boys will read as much as girls if you give them what they want to read. So it becomes this vicious circle of boys don't read. You're not publishing books that they want to read. Well, they don't read because you're not publishing stuff that they want to read. I mean, I wrote this book, Killer Species, for Scholastic. And I'm sorry, if I'm a 10-year-old with a $10 bill at a book fair and I have a giant alligator about to eat people in a canoe, I'm in, I'm easy. I have a low threshold, and giant alligators will do that.
I did, field testing with you. My grandson, he goes by the screen name of Thor, which is actually a very good name for him, even though it's not his real name. And Thor got hooked on, he was just the perfect age for the Killing Seas, The Enemy Above, and
Prisoner of War.
Those three books, he was just like going into middle school on those books. Those are action books. And the Killer Sea, I want you to know that I had to hear summaries of that plot a number of times.
Well,
this has to do with a shipwreck where there's an older brother who has to protect the younger brother. And even though Thor has a sister, I know that really, really appealed to him. So what do you think are the elements that make a great book for, I'm going to generalize boys, but I think it depends on the age of the boys.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because I often say that and it's true, I get as many letters and emails from girls as I do boys. I mean, and so going back to what I was saying is I think that girls will read boy books.
Absolutely.
Boys won't read girl books. I wrote this Spy Goddess series. I couldn't get a boy to read it, between the title and the cover with the girl on the cover.
And that Spy Goddess series was a good series. I liked it.
And so I just couldn't get, but with those three books you mentioned, Into the Killing Seas, Prisoner of War, The Enemy Above, I just got an email from a young girl yesterday or the day before. And she said, I just wanted to thank you. I'm reading Enemy Above. I had done some read alouds on YouTube that I posted on YouTube where I read a chapter each day. And she says, thank you for doing the read alouds. That really helped me. And thank you for all you do and say for people like me, which I don't know what that meant, but I
Oh,
think she was trying to say that she struggled with reading.
right.
And so the read along was helping her, and the book, she said, I'm on chapter 23.
How do you,
But
how do the kids access that read along?
it's just on my YouTube channel. Just search Michael P. Spradlin, and I did Into the Killing Seas, Enemy Above, and The Youngest Templar.
And the enemy above is it's World War II when the kid has
Right,
to live in a cave to escape.
right. It's based on a true story.
Yeah.
It's about a Jewish family who escapes the Nazis in Ukraine, and they lived underground in a cave system for almost 2 years.
Mhm.
The women and children in the group did not see the sun for over 500 days. The men and the young boys would go out at night to forage for supplies and get water and things like that, but the women never left the underground. And it's an absolutely true story. So
But a lot of your books are based on, I mean, you're an American history or a history.
correct.
And a lot of your books,
Right.
including the one that you just have, the new one, which unfortunately I do not have to hold up, is these all have historical background, right?
Yes,
Talk
right.
to us about Close Call.
Well, Close Calls is nonfiction, actually, and I have a picture of it to hold up. And this is, the subtitle is How 11 US Presidents Escaped from the Brink of Death.
Right.
And it starts with President Washington, there were several plots to kill him before he was president. The British had sent spies and informants and all these nefarious types to try to bump him off. The theory being that if you cut off the head of the snake will die, and the revolution would die, with him. None of them succeeded, thankfully. But it tells that story of how the British tried to infiltrate his his staff, how he was able to thwart it. It goes on to talk about President Kennedy, who served during World War II and whose ship was wrecked by a Japanese destroyer, and how he had to not only keep his men alive for 5 or 6 days, but figure out a way to rescue them and get them before they, fell into the hands of the Japanese. It talks about the first President Bush, who was shot down during World War II, and how he was rescued and avoided capture. But probably my favorite in it is the story of Teddy Roosevelt, who was actually shot by a would-be assassin in Milwaukee in 1912. He was running for president under the Bull Moose Party. Shot kind of underneath the lung. The bullet didn't puncture the lung, but it went in. Refused to go to the hospital, and went on to give his almost 90-minute speech with a bullet in his side, standing up on the stage, bleeding. Luckily for him, he had his text of his speech was about 50 pages, and he folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket with his eyeglass case, and that slowed the bullet down enough to prevent it from killing him. And he went on, like I said, to give this, and would stare down. His assistants would start creeping toward him because they thought he might pass out, and he would stare them down until they backed off, and he finished the speech. And he opened the speech to this raucous crowd in Milwaukee by saying, I don't know if anyone has told you, but I have just been shot. But it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. And then went on to give this speech. So
that was just stupid. Teddy,
yeah, well, but I think the underlying theme of this is that just like my fiction books, it's all people in a situation where they find something, whether it's an inner strength or the help of friends or whatever it is to just overcome some obstacle. And like all of my books, I was researching Into the Killing Seas when I came across the story that I knew about President Bush being shot down, and that led me down to rabbit hole of, these other stories. And that's usually how most of my books work. I'm working on something and I find
Right.
something,
Find something else.
and it,
I just, because I'm such an American history buff, I just love, and that was one of the things I really loved with Thor, giving him these little slices of history. And, you package it. You've got some wonderful covers. They really do.
yeah, no, I have, they have.
The crocodile and
Right.
the boat and all that. And I love it, the way this presents history in just a wonderful, painless way for kids.
Right. I think that's something that can be really overlooked, because if you think about the evolution of humankind, uh, all of our history, whether it was passed down in the beginning orally, around the campfire or whatever, has all been told in stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really good way. Now, the thing that uh, really makes me super happy is when I get a note from a kid, especially, Into the Killing Seas is probably my favorite novel out of all that I've written. But when they tell me, like, I read your book and then I went and read a bunch of nonfiction about the USS Indianapolis
Yes.
because I wanted to learn more. I went to a school visit, did an author visit to a school in Indiana, and they had spent the whole semester studying the war in the Pacific and the USS Indianapolis. They created a cargo hold where the boys were hidden. They made a memorial of ribbons for the crew, with different colors for the Marines versus the Navy, those that survived and those that perished at sea. And they made a game out of the book with, questions, and you had to, answer a question about the story to move along this. I mean, it was just amazing.
When you saw that, did you cry?
Oh, I almost did. I just, and then I think the one thing that has come out of that book in particular was I received an invitation after it was published. I got an email from a teacher, and her grandfather was a survivor, and she invited me to the reunion. They hold a reunion every year in Indianapolis. And there's only, at the first time I went, I think there were about 12 men there, because, they're all in their 90s.
Mm-hmm.
There's only, I think, 8 still living now. And to have opportunity.
The USS Indianapolis was a merchant
No,
marine ship.
no,
No,
it was a Navy ship.
it was a
It was
Navy.
a naval ship. It's the worst disaster at sea in U.S. naval history.
Where was it? What
It
part?
was in Leyte Gulf in near the Philippines,
Okay.
and it had just delivered the components for the atomic bomb to Tiananmen Island,
Wow.
and
Okay.
it was on its way back to Guam. It picked up crew in Guam, and then was on its way to the Philippines to join the fleet for the invasion of Japan. This was in July 1945. And on the way there, it was sunk 2 torpedoes from a Japanese submarine, 1,200 crew, just about. 900 made it into the water, abandoned ship, but only 316 ultimately survived 5 days later. They were just not only from injury and burns, but starvation, thirst, and then the horrific shark attacks. They had the misfortune of sinking in some of the most shark infested waters on the planet. And they just lost, over 600 men to those shark attacks. So it's an incredible story.
You put 2 kids in the middle of it.
Right. I had these 2 boys stowaway trying to get back to the Philippines to find their parents that were separated during the war, and had them observe, as act as observers sort of to this event that was unfolding, and to be able to understand and see firsthand that, that courage and that wherewithal, that refusal to die. I mean, basically, they just, the men that survived, they just refused to die. And
you also put a kid on the Bataan Death March.
I did. That's my book, Prisoner of War, also based on a true story. It's based on the life of America's youngest POW. And the really, I guess, the horrific part of the story, he had snuck into the Marine Corps, which was very common during World War II, because we don't think of it today, but back then, very few people had birth certificates. Very people had, any kind of records. My dad didn't have a birth certificate, when he joined. So he's 15 years old. He joins the Marines. He gets shipped to the Philippines. They find out that he's underage and he's about to be sent home. And that's the day the Japanese attack the Philippines. And he's stuck there until the surrender, and then spends the rest of the war in a prison camp, and was eventually taken to Japan. This is another part of the war that's really not known, that many POWs, as Japan lost ground and lost territory, were taken back to Japan and put at work as slave labor in Japanese steel mills and factories and things like that to try to keep that war machine going. And so it's a really just amazing story, but he did survive the Bataan Death March, and he survived those years. I mean, when you think about somebody that's 15 years old and they should be getting their driver's license and, driving to the malt shop and taking Sally to the prom and, all these things. And instead you're fighting for your survival.
That's Thor's age.
It's remarkable. And I guess that's one of the things that so much has attracted me to that period, just is to think about the fact that these were 17, 18, 19-year-old boys who just went, and, they just went. And
about the Templar books.
Mm-hmm.
What is the age range for those books?
I would say this is the Youngest Templar, the first book, The Keeper of the Grail. I would say the age is like 10 and up.
Yeah.
In the business we call it middle grade, so that 4th, 5th, 6th grade, kind of in the middle between, elementary school and high school. So
that there are 4 books in that series?
There's three. It's a trilogy. Correct.
Yeah.
And it's just a ton of action adventure. It has a really strong female character in it. That's really great. The main character meets and befriends the young Robin Hood on his way back to England. I mean, so it's just got a lot of historical figures. I always love that kind of fiction when I'm reading historical fiction, when there's a real figure in it that that the author will take and sort of bring to life.
Specialty. So have you done any adult books, or do you have any desire to do adult?
I have done an adult novel. It's called Blood Riders, and it's a Western paranormal about a cavalry officer, a disgraced cavalry officer who's in Fort Leavenworth and is let out to track down and fight and destroy a group of well, I don't want to give it away, but they rhyme with jampires. So
so many people, and I must admit, I get a little bit aggravated about this. So you're gonna have to talk.
Oh no.
So many people have said to me, I want to write a children's book because to them, that's the easiest thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I said, writing kids' books is really hard. Would you talk about that from a writer's perspective? Because I have a lot of people who are interested in writing are listening to this. So talk a little bit about writing kids' books.
Yeah, I think I do think that's probably true. I get the same. I actually had somebody say to me, like, how hard can it be? And I was like, wow, right to my face. Usually I get that on an Amazon review or something, but the big misconception is you have to tell a good story. Yeah. In your books, you tell good stories. Now the audience is adults. My audience happens to be kids, but I still have to tell a good story. The other part of it is, I think you have to be honest as a writer when you're writing for kids. Kids are smart. I mean, they see through things, and they know a lot more about what's going on in the world than adults realize. They're very intuitive, and they get. I get letters and they'll talk about, a character that they really identified with, or, a part of a book that really spoke to them. And so that is the main thing, is you have to be honest and, tell a good story. Now, certainly you have to work in areas and themes, I guess, that, kids can understand and relate to. And, there's certain things you have to make sure that you don't do. Like, you can't let, adults come in at the last minute and save the day. I mean, your protagonist has to, has to be the hero, so, but it's just not, it, it, it is, I always say that for me, at least, writing one of my novels for a young reader is more about taking things out than putting things in. It's more of a throw everything against the wall. And I had an editor tell me this at early on, was that just put everything in, and then we will strip out what isn't needed or what's not clear, because it's much easier organically to do it that way, rather than to be at the end and say, this story's thin, or it doesn't, it's not robust enough, and to then try to go back and add to it to pump it up. It's just not the same as if you put it all out there and then pull back, the parts that you want to say. So I just think it's like I said, it's just tell the good story. And then after
the craft, though, because you have to deal with a different kind of vocabulary. I mean, how do you make those
right.
decisions?
Well, I mean, it can be very, believe it or not, it can be very scientific. I wrote a book, a series of books called the Pararescue Corps. And this is about U.S. Air Force special operators, the PJs they're called, that will go after downed pilots that are, shot down behind enemy lines and whatnot. And that publisher had an actual, they called it high-low. They call it high interest, low reading level. So they wanted the book written, to have a lot of action, a lot of, but they wanted the vocabulary and the structure of the book and all like that to be very, very specific for that low reading level, struggling, reluctant reader. So there was an actual software program that I used. After I would write a chapter, I would enter the chapter into the software program, and it would tell me what the reading level was.
Wow, that's
and
really
I had to get it down to third grade. And so it meant everything from taking out multi-syllable words to changing the surnames of characters, because the surnames could drive the reading level up. And it was like anything that could be frustrating to a potential struggling reader. I remember talking to the editor, and I said, well, I feel like this chapter needs a little more character development. He's like, character development, schmaracter development, blow something up, I mean, just more action and more dialogue. The dialogue makes it shorter, less complex text, easier for them, to digest and as they go along. So there is that approach that you can take, and it was interesting. It was a real challenge, to do that, because I always joke, I've written a couple of short stories for Boys Life magazine, and I have about a 1,500 to 1,700 word limit, and I always tell the editor, boy, I'm just getting started, at 1,700 words. So, but it's just that craft of, you need to think about your audience, just, and are they going to understand this? Are they going to be able to relate to this as a kid? And, I think one of the good things about writing for, middle grade now is that the world is so much more wide open to kids today. So the things that they're exposed to, and the things that they know about, and the things that they have understood or witnessed even, has become, much, much greater than it was when I was that age, or any of us were that age. It's just a different world with the internet and
I'm
all
not
these things.
crazy about digital books for kids, because they already have so much screen time. What do you think about that? Is there something missing?
I kind of have a love-hate relationship, having worked in children's publishing as well. I think that the ebook wave sensation has kind of leveled out. I think we know the people that are going to use them and the people that are not. In children's books, it's remarkable because when you read the surveys and you look at the numbers and the comments, the kids even who are, addicted to screens want a physical book. They want that. You don't want to read Goodnight Moon to your kid with an iPad. You want them to hold the book and smell the book and turn the pages and all those things. But I do think, and especially now that we're in this COVID situation where we have so much remote learning and kids aren't able to go to the library, that if that's their only exposure, if that's the only way that we can get stories to them is through a digital book, then thank goodness we have the ability to do that.
Right.
Because this is, we're kind of living in an Alice in Wonderland world right now.
We are.
And I do think it's, and I know I have teacher friends that are they're just so, they're not, they're just, the thing that bothers them the most is they're not able to be with their kids, and they can't, they know that some of them really struggle and need the extra help, and they just can't do that over the internet. You just can't do it on a Zoom, when
That's so true.
And so it's, I think that, like I said, I would prefer that it always be a physical book, but I do think that for some kids, there's a place for it.
I was thinking about this whole thing with writing children's books because of my personal experience. When I wrote my book, This Heart of Mine, Molly's a children's book author, and there's, as my readers know, this whole,
which I read in the airport at LaGuardia while I was waiting on a delayed flight.
So we have Daphne the Bunny and Benny the Badger, and everybody's after me to really write this children's book, but no one was as obnoxious about it as you. So finally, after all these years pass, I say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write a Daphne the Bunny story. Now, this is my first attempt to try to do this right. It was hysterical. The thing is about, 15 pages long. I mean, it's way, way long. And it has all of these adult-centered jokes, like about a gluten-free diet. I mean, I could not resist. So I send this off to you and you say, very politely, yeah, I know there's a tendency to put jokes for just adults in here, but you might want to think about that. So guess what I'm going to do?
What's that?
I added even more.
You always listen. So
we're going to be doing a special edition of This Heart of Mine with this Daphne the Bunny story, which isn't exactly targeted for adults and isn't exactly targeted for kids, but it's off my plate now.
There you go. Well, good. I'm glad that Daphne lives.
Oh my God, it's so hard to do. I just really admire the fact that you could do all this, because it is tough. So we're talking gift books, and I'm recommending the World War II books that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Templar series would be great. And I really think, I think and you can find all this on michaeljspradlin.com.
Michael P.
Michael, well, the Michael Jordan thing is, Chicago.
Well, and I also am the greatest, so.
So you can find all of his books there. I think there's kind of something for everyone. And this new one with the presidents just sounds really, really like, that's cool. That sounds like something I'd like to read.
Yeah, it's a great, like a book report book.
Let's talk about girls a little bit. Mm-hmm. I know that there's a wealth of material, and as a mother of sons and having a grandson, I'm really keyed in on getting boys to read, and as a former teacher myself. But there are still a lot of girls who are reluctant readers. What are you seeing for girls now that would be good gift for grandmas and nanas to put under the tree?
Well, it depends on what the girl likes to read. I think, one of the best, if they're into fantasy, like Harry Potter or things like that, one of the better books that I've read in a couple of years is this, it's called The Children of Blood and Bone. And that's a really good, really good fantasy series.
What age group for that?
It's like middle grade, like, 12 and up. I always go to, I think because, not only because she's a friend, but she's a really, really terrific writer, uh, and really reaches, I think, that girl audience is Meg Cabot,
Oh, yeah,
who
her
wrote the Princess Diaries. And she has just, I mean, you can go to her website
she's so prolific.
and yeah, and you can't, I don't think you can go wrong with any of the books that she writes for young people. She just has that, she's got the gift, of being able to create these characters that girls especially really relate to. And she, they sound like, they're that age. I mean, she just has got that,
She's got it. And she
that
has
magic, whatever it is.
her own, which is really amazing that she
Right.
just hits that. I like your Spy Goddess series personally.
Yeah, Spy Goddess. It's really funny. That series was my first novel. Spy Goddess, Live and Let Shop.
I remember.
They're all still available in fan.
Did you get that part? Yeah.
Yeah, Live and Let Shop. And I still get email from readers asking me. I think the first book came out in 2006, and they're still asking me to write more. A couple of weeks ago, I got an email from a young woman who's in college, who was like 12 when the book came out, and she's in college now. And she said, I was rearranging my room at home, and I came across these books, and I loved them so much, and I just, were you ever able to write more? Would you write more? And I always have to say I need something to to just really break and hit it big so that I can go back and pull some of these stories, like sort of, speaking of Meg Cabot, that's kind of what she did. I mean, she had written, a ton of stuff before Princess Diaries. And once that, broke out, then she was able to go back and visit a lot of those series again that she loved and that she wanted to keep going with, that, just wasn't able to because of the way publishing works.
Well, I love the books that focus on history. I think, with the old saw, if you know your history, you know your future. And letting these kids know, I mean, for me, having a father who was in the South Pacific when I was born, and having that legacy to pass on to the kids, to my grandchildren, so they know more about that war. Their other grandfather was in the European theater. I like them knowing their history, and I love to explore that.
I do too. And I think, growing up with a father who was a veteran, and like I said, growing up in a really small town, when I look back on it now and I think about my dad, and the men in this small town that I grew up in, every man his age, every single one was a veteran. I mean, when we talk about an entire generation, I mean, it's really true. Mm-hmm. And so it had a really profound impact on me, growing up, time at the VFW and the Memorial Day parades and all this thing. And my dad's brother, he died of wounds on June 8th, 1944, on Omaha Beach. And something my dad really didn't talk about much, but I know it had, it affected him. And I mean, how could it not? And, to me, that's one of the things as a storyteller, I just think about all these stories that every one of these men has, and, how we're losing so many of them, now. And,
this age.
And so, one of the things, like I said, to tie it back to kids that will write me and say, well, I went and read about the real story of the USS Indianapolis. And, I learned a lot about it and a lot about and that just really, that's to me is what it's about, is to just say that, look, this, it wasn't always like this. We had to fight for this, and we had to, thanks to our fathers and grandfathers, and mothers and grandmothers, and we got to live in the greatest place in the world. And
it's true. What so with Close Calls out now, what is coming up next?
Well, it's the work that I have in progress is another nonfiction piece, and I don't have quite the title yet, but I'm calling it World War II by the Numbers. And it will take a look at, for example, the 993 Tuskegee Airmen, the 63 WASPs who died in service, the women of the air service pilots, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the all Japanese American Go for Broke division that served in Europe, in the European conflict. So and that's why I'm taking sort of these numbers as kind of the hook to tell the story of what these numbers mean and
I think you should
one. Pardon me?
I think you should do a book on each one of those groups.
Oh yeah, well I would love to. I would really love to, but as it turns out, it's really interesting. I went to college with a couple of women whose father was in the 442nd, and he came out of an internment camp and went right to Europe. And so they've given me access to his photos, and I'm gonna use his story to tell sort of the larger story of this. So
it is so great talking to you, Michael P.
Likewise.
Go to michaelpspradlin.com. You can see all of his books. And I just am big. I think whatever kid in your life that you're giving a gift to over the holidays, let's make sure there's some books tucked in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Well, listen, it's been great after all this time to finally be on the show. So we'll have to do this again.
We will. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.